at least two to begin with. And this will wrap up your immunology as well. So I want to go back and ask you questions related to what we have discussed so far. This is a Time magazine, one of the front page article that appeared. And it is an immunology article, I can tell you that. And it came like cursed yet blessed. Okay, so I'm going to take you to some of the concept, and that may include HIV, AIDS, and many other aspects that we are going to discuss today. Okay, so this appeared December 06 or 8, whatever, 6, 1993. I mean, there is no issue with the name because it's published, so I can go ahead and tell you the name, though I cannot pronounce that. But she's a poor woman, and she's working as a prostitute out of her home, a tiny roofed hut on the outside of Nairobi. Is it in Kenya? Okay. To feed her family, she entertains as many as 10 clients a day. So it will tell you the problems of AIDS and HIV. So this is not the only antiretroviral therapy or the drugs that we are looking into it. There's a behavior issue. There are a lot of issues with that. It's one of the most complex issues that we have. Okay? And there are some questions, immunological questions that we are asking ourselves. And you will wonder, just by looking at the title, cursed yet blessed. I mean, many people, because we don't go and have, any opinion in terms of people's morality, behavior, and so on and so forth, as ethics, as physicians and healthcare professional, but we will do what needs to be done as a part of our professionalism. Of course, people will say that she's cursed because she has to do that, But why is he blessed? Why is she blessed? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And you can see from here the situation in many parts of the world, especially Africa, is, let alone, I mean, it's not Nairobi alone. I'm pretty sure prostitution is legalized in Denmark, for example, and many other places. And in this case, you can think that in her town where she comes from, there are 7,000 sex workers, so to speak. They are working. I mean, that's what they consider as their job. Now, the question that I have, and why is she blessed, is I'm going to teach you HIV. I'm going to talk about infection. Immunological question was a small group of sex workers, like this case I just mentioned, in Nairobi, where there's a lot of things going on. She has remained uninfected. So you can look at the exposure. She has 10 men a day. God knows for how much time. But by the end of the day, she is not having HIV. Though we teach you, and you most likely would think that's the reason. So they thought, why is she resistant to HIV infection? So this question is based upon your understanding of immunology. Okay? And there could be a lot of immunological reasons that I can tell you that why is she not having HIV. One of the reasons is that maybe she's associated with, I'm not going to ask you the question that I've already provided you answer. So don't think that you're going to go ahead of me, and because this lecture is posted, it's already there. So one of the things I would think is that maybe she has a certain HLA class 1 and 2 allele that is not putting up that immune response to cause her HIV. Good, that immunologists will accept that. Or maybe she has CD8 responses to HIV infections, immunologically correct. Or She may have very good T helper. We are thinking of all these things. What could be the reason? The reason is because if she has something that's protective, we're going to use that as a tool to treat HIV patients. That's the whole idea in these cases. If she has something in her body that she's not getting HIV infected, we want to use that mechanism to help HIV patients. So you can see the interest that we have over here. So we are hypothesizing. We're coming with hypothesis based upon our sound information. Okay, T helper responses. Maybe she has a very specific IgA, protective. We don't know. So these are all projects that were done for a long, long time to figure out why that was happening. Okay? Now, unfortunately, from 1993, we started working for 8 years, and then we found out that eventually she did become positive. Okay, so we call that late seroconversion. And I'm going to talk about that sometimes people may have had an activity they don't even remember, and they have a free time, where the virus is going to sit in the system and don't do anything and then come back. Right? So that's an incubation period of this viruses. HIV is known for that. It can sit your system, in this case for 8 years, but it can sit in your system for more than that and then come back. Why do we need to know that? That during that 10 years or whatever she was doing, and she was taking so many people, so she may have phenomenally passed on the HIV to other people. That's why Central Africa and Africa as a whole is a big mess because of the tests, because of the problems that we have with HIV. Okay? And WHO is making a big effort how to fight that. So it's like a global issue. So what I want you to do is that I'm not going to teach you every detail, but I want you to think logically with whatever information that has been provided to you and the answers that you may have, okay? Now, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, keep in mind, is acquired, right? There's some congenital immunodeficiencies, so this was acquired. So you basically are looking for it. You have a choice and you use your choice. Okay, I mean, she was poor. I mean, you can have socioeconomic, whatever reasons would have, we can accept that. So there's a government responsibility, there's a world responsibility, and many other players which are important in terms of, and you will wonder, what has it got to do with me? Well, you will find out what has it got to do with you eventually, because you're going to be in this profession, and then you're going to come across these people. So as broader objective, we're going to talk about epidemiology, spend quite a lot of time on that. And then we're going to talk about AIDS. Is it STI or STD? I'm going to talk about that. What's the pathogenesis of human immunodeficiency virus? And the rest of the things. Some of the questions are still unanswered. It's one of the major burden on CDC and WHO, how to do that. Okay, and how to fight something which is so prevalent and so common. But I'm going to give you a little bit of historical aspect. And I did talk about that earlier. This was from former Surgeon General, I forgot her name at that time, so Everett Koop. So that's what she said. And rightly, if you look at the story of that woman, she may have had passed to that. She probably was talking about this particular concept for 10 years. Maybe she wasn't an immunologist, I think, because at that, well, if I was to say anything, I would say for the last as many years or whole life. So this is a choice that you're making if you were to get involved in that kind of activity, to be sure what are you getting into in terms of acquiring. And there's nothing you can do about that, especially for viruses and STD. Okay? Now, historically, 1981, nobody knew anything. You just made it 1981, nobody has heard of HIV. Nobody has heard of AIDS. But this is another thing that you have to keep in mind. keep your eyes open, self-learning, and how do people develop this critical thinking? That's something, and I was talking to Ransford as well, a capstone project. You have to think beyond, outside the box, beyond what is there. Open up your mind, and you will see this is a typical example. There is one cancer which is called Kaposi sarcoma, which is very rare. It is relatively benign, and usually in older people. We know that at most of the physicians. But what happens is one of the physicians in San Francisco, he started noticing that there are quite a few cases of young white males who are coming with the condition that he thought was Kaposi sarcoma. Well, it's none of his business though, but if you know the soap notes and other thing, you sometimes have to take sexual history. And guess what? Most of the time people lie. So that's another problem. So you have to win their confidence and make sure that they tell you what is happening, especially if you want to take sexual history. But good enough for him and good enough for the rest of the community. He did found out all 8 of them were gay. All 8 of them. Not a big deal. Coincidence, that's what we thought. But at the same time, another physician working opposite end, 4,000 miles or whatever miles are there, he also noticed the same thing. And he also notices there were young gay men in New York also having Kaposi sarcoma. So that rings the bell. So they started now thinking, what's going on here? What's the issue here? Is something there, something to do with the sexuality, something to do with the cancer? What is going on? But something is going on, they can figure it out. Okay? So you can see the other thing what happened was, immunology is still developing, right? And what other thing they noticed was that the same people also came up in California and New York with a very rare lung infection, pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, PCP. But these are some of those physicians who are thinking outside the box, who are vigilant, and they are keeping record of the patient, and they are not doing a routine work. That's what we say, thinking outside the box. And on top of that, especially for pharmacists, one of the, success story, you can read it on all. So what happens is that, let me go back, not pharmacist, drug technician, Sandra Ford. So she's working in CDC. So what she notices is, in April, she's taking a record, she noticed a high number of requests for a drug, pentamidine. None of her business, right? Who cares? But probably she cared. So she wanted to find out what is it for, and she found out it's used for pneumocystis carinii, pneumonia. And then she also found out a doctor was treating a gay man. So he went to the history. A doctor was treating a gay man in his 20s, young white males. That's what I told you, who had pneumonia. And remember, I told you earlier, a young man should have or have not? Should not have pneumonia. If he or she's having pneumonia, problem with the immune system. Pneumonia is extreme ages, very young or very old. So very good observation. So 2 weeks later, he called to ask for a refill of a rare drug. So if you ask for a refill for a rare, well, I don't think if you have this automated Walgreens or whatever refill, the machine is not going to think, but human beings are going to think. She should have said, who cares? But she thought this was unusual. Nobody ever asked for a refill, right? And patients usually get cured. 1-day treatment, and this patient died. So all these things are cooking up. Different places, especially in this part of the world, the rest of the world is silent. Nobody knows what's going on. But keep in mind, do you think that HIV virus was not there? Must have been there, right? Okay. Viruses are known to mutate. So all this story is building up 1981. Nobody knows, nobody heard of anything. And then what happens is, as I said, observation is the key of a scientific mind. So you have to observe, very keen observation, think, and don't have like a, like what you call robotic attitude. Well, HIV was discovered, but then the scientists started to look for where did the HIV come from? A lot of studies were done. You cannot imagine. It was big news everywhere, right? And I think CDC probably was one of those places who said something to do with human immunodeficiency virus, because they had to do a lot of work to make sure that they can identify that virus in those patients, right? Then they had to do the rest of the work because they had a big work. They had to associate that with homosexuality. They had to associate that with sexual transmission, so on and so forth, from 1981 to 2016. So like 35, 36 years, right? So what they found out, that probably this is the closest that they could get, that simian immunodeficiency virus, which was most likely transmitted to humans and mutated into HIV. So what was happening in some of the places in Africa were the humans were consuming meat of chimpanzees. And you'll be amazed to know there was one, you can Google it, and somebody was wondering how would that be, and it turned out to be that the monkey meat, the chimpanzee meat is still sold in New York. So there are people, I remember I had this, I don't want to say which country, but, well, Russian. So he was looking for the horse meat. This is not available, but it is available. I mean, CDC said, no, it's not sold, but if you go look for the market, it is there. This is like delicacy, right? Even in Chicago, there was one very special French cuisine, and somebody figured it out because they have, I don't know which bird. So they infect the bird with a virus, and the bird gets cirrhosis, which is a chronic liver disease, and that cirrhosis is cooked as delicacy in one of the French cultures. So and where is it happening? Here in Chicago. So be warned, I know what's going on. So anyway, the problem is that no one is sure, though, a lot of work to be done. So regulations for food and this and that, but a lot of stories. But again, I wouldn't comment on that. But I'm just kind of creating awareness that we're still struggling to find out where did this HIV come from. Well, so easier for us to blame. So maybe I don't want to say. Okay, a lot of work had been done, but most of the textbooks, if you want to read for the textbook, they think that HIV was present in Central Africa. So that's the earliest. So what they wanted to do is to go back to the postmortem examination, tissues, this and that, and see if they can figure it out, take it out. In 1950s, people traveling with a boom in the travel industries, all this Boeing and airplanes and people moving, migration and so on and so forth. And then things started traveling everywhere in the world as early as 1970s, right? And then again, you can see it started with both males and females, but the story for US at the beginning was, it was known, and I know when I was there, I read it in 1981, we were told at that time, it is a disease of white, young, homosexual males. But I'm going to talk about that, how the things have transformed from there to this day, based upon CDC statistics. Okay? Now, you may ask yourself, and people are going to ask you, who are the high-risk people? I mean, that's always a question that should come to your mind, because I remember probably Brooklyn, New York. Some of my class fellows were doing residency over there, and I found out that especially in Brooklyn, nobody was willing to work in this medical wards, early 80s. And the reason was nobody wanted to touch the HIV patient because there was a big scare. There was a big, big scare Very right. Because you don't want to earn a physician's money and in the process lose your life. Who's going to do that? Okay. But you will see the complexity as we move along in terms of disease. So definitely we want to know who are the high-risk group. So starting from, I just give you a story, 1981, white, male, young, gay people. And guess what? Who is the top of list right now as of today? Women in heterosexual relationship. Okay, so this is something that we need to figure out, right? What is happening, how is happening? It's a CDC responsibility. And I mean, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of conspiracy theories here and there, but I would still recommend, and I think as instructor, I would vouch for CDC statistics and WHO statistics in terms of relying on the data and, of course, the textbooks. Okay? Of course, number 2 is men having sex with men, MSM. Youth, for some reason, because they want to go for adventurous behavior or kind of risk-taking behavior. So that's something to do with the age. Very important. I just told you sex workers. And you say, okay, don't give them a license. Government is not willing to do that. Some other countries are not going to do that. So they may accept sex workers as a profession and test them for HIV and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of social, economic issues over here, moralities and ethic issues here. This is not the pretense in this lecture. I'm going to talk about that and discuss that. Some other format, some other class, some other person. Okay? Of course, drug addicts. Truck drivers. Why would the truck drivers be a high-risk group? Yeah. The truck drivers long distance away from home, and I used to wonder when I used to go from one state to another, I start seeing the ads. So probably it's from truck drivers, right? So you move from one state to another state, and right at the boundary, you'd see all those ads. Probably they're meant for the truck drivers, I believe. Don't get me wrong on that. Immigrants, yeah, if it's in Africa or some part, they're going to move around and bring it here. Very common. Prisoners, if you go back, because of, again, I don't want to go in detail, I just can give you the incidence of homosexuality very high in the prisoners. So that's the reason. Soldiers, we talked about gonorrhea, you know, again, the incidence of homosexuality or whatever is very high. Can you think of any other group that I may not have included? Yeah. Of course. And these are all those typical viral infection that can be transmitted from one person to other. This is typical virus. What else? Yeah. Say it again? Same thing. That's what he said. Yeah. Overdose antibiotic? What would that do? No. Yeah. Say it again? Ethnicity is not a high risk factor, it's an observation. It's an observation. Because if I was to say factor, I would say something to do with their behavior, which is more to do with you acquire. You may go for behavioral therapy, nothing to do with your gene. That's what I'm trying to say. Nothing to do with any particular person's gene. Something to do with the behavior. Yeah, of course. This, again, sexual transmission, part of sexual transmission. Okay. Okay. One extra credit for any person going to give me the right answer that I have in my mind. Just, okay, let us speak. Say it again? I didn't get that. Healthcare worker is pretty sure for all the diseases. Yeah. Yeah, you. Women? Yeah, we already said it's already there. I'm not asking you a question that's not there. Yeah. Say it again? Children are vertical transmission. Environment? Like what? It's not floating around in the environment you can inhale. So that's sexual transmission, I believe. It has to be physical. Vertical transmission is children, yeah. Lab workers, Physicians?
Who are economically challenged.
Okay, you're all right, but that's not the correct answer. The correct answer is okay. Just hold on. Don't get excited. Don't get excited. Don't get excited. Well, if you look, the thing is that players, in terms of like any other risk-taking groups, one of the notorious thing, because teenage want to role play a particular person, right? It's a behavior issue, and you can imagine a player like Magic Johnson. Those of you who were birthed before 1980, yeah, of course. But I'm going to give you the reason. Celebrities. Celebrities. The reason is, I'm going to tell you the reason is. You see the reason? So he finds himself on the top of the paper, okay? But he didn't admit to that. Okay. The reason is because remember, those of you who are interested, you can see there's a socio-economic aspect of many things. Okay. Now, when he was interviewed, there's a good interview. I don't have time for that. Oprah and him talking about what was happening, and is explicit. I won't even talk about that. But anyway, what is happening in this case is that is early 80s, right? Early 80s, and the only information was that it's a disease, HIV disease of young, white, homosexual, gay people, nothing to do with me. That's what he thought, right? Not only that, if you listen to his interviews, God knows what the fact is, because it doesn't tell you how many years. It just said he just kind of admitted that, right? But the question is the impact of being spread it out to other people, okay? The other thing is that if you look at his interview, he said, I'm black, nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. Early 80s. Thinking of many of people. But again, this is also a socio-economic thing that is happening to people who may be in a very high risk. That's why for ethnicity, especially 2016, as we see today, of course, 46%. Half of the infections that we see today is in this community, half of that. Okay, and then again, the government needs to find out the reasons and so on and so forth. But if you are interested, you can look at the statistics. I'm going to give you a little brief statistics. Last year, I was very elaborate. And you can also read the historical perspective of the AIDS and what was happening and pathogenesis. I'm going to leave it on you. It's just a repetition, and those of you who are interested in that can look at that. So another timeline, HIV/AIDS, is that you can see right from the beginning to how many people got involved, a lot of celebrities that you just told me, the players who get exposed to these kind of activities more often than other people, then government instituting, protective sex and so on and so forth, and all the drugs that came up, and then it becoming a world epidemic. So it started off with New York, California, panic created all over the world. Probably nobody paid attention, but the fact is that over time, it has become a global thing to such an extent, and this is the latest, I just downloaded this morning. So all world authorities, UNICEF, even it's on CDC side, WHO, are saying that there are about like 37 million people total having AIDS. Of these, adults are 34, women are 17, children are 2.6 million. And every year, 2 million people are added to this list. Okay. Now, one of the things that CDC wants to do and WHO wants to do, of course, is education. That people know what is the high risk taking behavior, what needs to be done, so on and so forth. And I mean, you can target these people to tell them to do what they are doing, but what about these people, children? So that's another big issue to educate, women, children, as you said, vertical transmission. So this is a global epidemic, a global problem that we see today. If you look at U.S. statistics, and there are a lot of statistics, but these are some of the, I would say, flashcard or poster board, which the government is trying to, I'm pretty sure you must have seen in your high school, in your colleges, and so on and so forth, that they have to talk of these things, that gay and bisexual men have of all the highest rates that are there by HIV. The other statistic is be aware of the infection in this country. 1 out of 8 is living with HIV. That's a scary thing. Okay? And then again, 1 in 4 new HIV is coming in this age group, 13 to 24. That's why you see youth per se is a high risk behavior. Okay? And these are just poster boards from US statistics because they want to educate people. Maybe some of us may be parents of teenagers, and some of us are in a situation that we can rise and let people know. So education and seeing the importance of a particular disease is important. So you should know. It's more than passing an exam. It's more than getting a grade. It's something to do with real-time experiences that you and me can make in life. Again, global statistics. I just told you 37 million of the world, and then 2.6 million for the children. So that's a big concern. The other thing that you don't notice over here is a very, very high incidence in Central Africa, Africa as a whole, especially Sub-Sahara Africa. So the moment we talk of AIDS, we talk of the incidence, we talk of Sub-Sahara Africa. So that has, for all the reasons to have, and then again, I just give an example of what was going on in one particular city in Nairobi, for example. Okay. Now, CDC also wants to tell you that the incidence for new HIV infections, you say, who is getting it? Who got it last year? Who are these people? Then you find out, especially in women and teenage, 64% in the Black, 18 in the white, 15 in Hispanic, 3% in Asians. So these are CDC statistics in terms of who is getting HIV every year. Now, the other important thing for women and HIV, I just told you, pretty much the same situation for educating young girls, teenage girls, 1 in 4. And then again, also keep in mind that not all women are equally affected by HIV. And there are quite a few reasons for that. I'm going to discuss that in a while. And then again, also keep in mind, only half of women diagnosed with HIV are receiving care for HIV. That's another issue that we have. It's not only because, I'm not going to ask you, but you can ask yourself, do I need to get tested for HIV? Do I need to know about HIV? Am I a high-risk person? Am I in remote possibility be a part of that high-risk group? So this is something that is required for all of us to think on our own. And as I said, I purposely just want to get the facts from CDC, right? And they are over here say, get tested, get treatment, or because people are not, especially women. So this is the CDC in terms of overall rate. I looked at, it said 2006, I looked at 2014, I looked at even 2016 this morning. Other than the number, trend is the same. So nothing has changed in terms of the estimated rates of new HIV infection in all the populations mentioned over here. And especially for this community is a very astronomical kind of, they call it disproportionate kind of values in this particular group. And you can think that they are, of course, there are a lot of reasons for that. And this is another from CDC, NIH, about the government. They opened up a new website, AIDS.gov, especially for African American living with AIDS, 500,000. And you can see that in terms of diagnosis, in terms of treatment, in terms of virally suppressed. What it means is that if you were to put on with the drugs, because the other issue is that, keep that in mind. I just gave you an example of Magic Johnson, NBA player, celebrity, with all whatever he did, still living after 21 years of being diagnosed. But who's going to pay for the test? Who's going to pay for the therapy? It's not cheap. There's a big issue with the drug companies, that why the drug companies are charging people, in dollars, especially for people in Africa. How are they going to pay? These are some of the socioeconomic things that we normally see, and you can read on your own and form an opinion. In terms of estimated infections between male and female in terms of a new HIV infection, says 2010. I looked a little bit of difference in terms of percentages, but pretty much the picture is the same. Okay, so there is something happening that, of course, is going to go for behavior, is going to go. And what I can tell you right now, I talked about it last year. I may not have time for that, or if I may, I'm going to talk about that. So what the government did was they went for the high school surveys. So this is like high school surveys of risk-taking and what's happening in the high school. And then you will be amazed to know what the statistics are in terms of where the problems are coming from. Okay, so let's go back to the basic microbiology and immunology, and you can see from here, these are some of the clinical pictures and progression of, let's say, untreated. So let me enlarge that if I could, because that's important for us in terms of, so you can say that people may get initial infection, right? So it's nothing to do with multiple, it's just like one-time activity, you get it, wherever from, whatever form, you got it, right? It's in your system, HIV. So it's gonna go and look for cells. Immune cell is gonna go for immune cell. It has liking for CNS. That's another issue with this virus. It loves to stick to your brain cell. So you can go over there, it may cause mild illness, or it may cause meningitis. And then your system can fight over months to control the replication. But one of the very common thing that you see is persistent lymphadenopathy. So if you go to a physician for annual checkup, he's going to feel, all those palpatory lymph nodes that you have. So this is one of the causes, not the only cause, the lymph node, because they're fighting off an infection. And then again, over years, you can see these are the outcomes. You can still be well. I give an example, 10% of the people, more or less. You can have it, pass it on to your whatever, and then live with it, period. Or you may get AIDS. So the question is that you can be HIV positive and not have AIDS. And that happens for many other infections as well. But at the same time, you're good enough to pass it on to other people. So if, say, I tested, well, I shouldn't say tested, will definitely give it to you. But that, again, how many of us they know their HIV status, right? And how many of you are willing to engage in any kind of relationship with the person who said, I'm HIV positive? I mean, if I was a physician, a patient comes say, hey, doctor, I'm HIV positive. You can imagine what's going to happen to me. Even I'd go and touch him. It's natural. because it's a scare, it's a panic element. So people are not going to declare upfront. Okay, but theoretically, you can be HIV positive and not have disease at that particular time. Okay, you may have an AIDS, and the symptoms of AIDS are pretty much the same that we discussed in immunology as acquired immunodeficiency, and you have repeated infections, or you can have subacute encephalitis or dementia. So that's also very common for AIDS patient. You can, all those tiny little microorganisms that you discussed, your immune system should be good enough to fight that. But for this particular virus, you may be in trouble. Okay, so this is like we call clinical features of progression of untreated, and we'll talk about what the treatment options can do and how can we improve that. Okay, now of course we have a electron micrograph, and you can see this green colored viruses are attaching to the cell. And this is again a real-time picture, and you can again see a cell with all those proteins hanging out like receptors, and each one of them has a different name. We're going to discuss some of the receptors for treatment today, and then you can also see some of the viruses are going to go either attach or bud out of that. And again, you can see this virus budding out. So this is a typical electron micrograph that we've been discussing in the cartoon in the earlier. So you can see this is a HIV virus budding off of the cell. So that's what we call budding off, like exocytosis. And in this case also, you can see a cell and tons of viruses, they've already been released for that. So the other question in this particular case is that if you are HIV positive, so you carry viral load. We talk about that. Viral load. How much virus is running in you? And where is it? And how it's going to be passed on to the people who come in contact with you. Okay? So this is what we call in terms of viral replication and viral load. And we test HIV patients for that. Now, microbiology. Now, I'm pretty sure that I've already spent a lot of time on telling you that this is a lipid bilayer, which is a envelope virus over here. And these are those glycoproteins that are jutting out over here. They are also attached to the matrix. So this is like a matrix. And then we have a RNA. So you can have an RNA over here. And some of the enzymes are attached, like reverse transcriptase and some other. Let's talk about three important enzymes that HIV has: reverse transcriptase, protease, and integrase. Okay. Now, this is a T lymphocyte. You can see from here, T lymphocyte. And this virus is going to attach to it. For attachment, it needs receptors. So it's going to look for CD4 receptor. And one of the glycoproteins, there are many glycoproteins which are important for HIV. I want you to pay attention to this globular one, which is GP120, and the cylindrical one, which is GP41, and the matrix protein, which is P17. And the significance of this is that, of course, you're going to make immune responses, antibiotics to these particular glycoproteins. And they can be broken apart and be running in your system, and we can look at in terms of depicting a viral load. Okay? So three enzymes: reverse transcriptase, protease, integrase. We talked about GP120 globular, GP41. We talked about matrix protein, which is P17. And there is another one, which is a capsid protein, which is P24. So P24, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 important proteins that are there, because I'm going to talk about the antibodies to these proteins and how we're going to work them up. Okay. The other important thing for first step of this virus attaching to the T cell is going to look for CD4, which is going to attach to GP120. You see that? GP120. Okay. And the other one, in this case, is going to attach to chemokine receptors. We talked about CCR5 and CCR receptors, which are chemokine receptors. So they will probably hold on to the virus and bring it in like with both hands. Okay. So this is like a typical structure we talked about the outer proteins, and you can also see that both of these proteins, though they are expressed outside, but they basically go and anchor the matrix. So this is a matrix over here, right? You can see from here, typical example for that. And it looks simple when I showed you there's thousands of them expressed on one virus. They're all there. And they're important in terms of the therapy that we are going to use for antiretroviral therapy. Okay? Okay. Well, it's a little bit complicated. I'll stop here and take any question that you may have before I go to the genes. Because these are all genes of HIV, and that each gene has a purpose, and we're going to go and stop the replication for that. Okay?